Karen, this is on you." I remember thinking those words as I stood in the hospital hallway staring at the white doors that had just swallowed my daughter. A few hours earlier, my neighborhood had been quiet. The kind of afternoon where kids draw on sidewalks and neighbors water their lawns without a care in the world. Then everything shattered. Tires screamed, wood exploded, and my 8-year-old daughter disappeared beneath the hood of a speeding car that never should have been moving in the first place. If you live in an HOA neighborhood, you probably know someone like Karen, the self-appointed ruler of every driveway and mailbox, the woman who believed the street existed to follow her rules and her rules alone. For years, she treated the neighborhood like her kingdom, issuing warnings and threats as if she owned every house on the block. Most of us ignored her. Some people feared her. But what happened that afternoon crossed a line no angry HOA meeting ever could. Because the car that smashed into my porch wasn't driven by Karen. It was driven by her 13-year-old son. And somehow, unbelievably, Karen decided I was the one who should pay. If you've ever lived in an HOA neighborhood, you know there's always someone who takes the role a little too seriously. In our case, that someone was Karen. Officially, she was just the HOA president. Unofficially, she behaved like the mayor, judge, and police department of the entire street. Every morning, she marched through the neighborhood with a clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority, scanning lawns, driveways, and mailboxes as if she were searching for evidence of some grand conspiracy against order. Trash cans left out 10 minutes too long? Fine. Grass half an inch above the rulebook limit? Warning letter. One neighbor hung a small holiday wreath in March, and Karen treated it like a federal offense. The strange part wasn't just the rules. It was the way she delivered them. HOA meetings turned into public trials where Karen sat at the front table, calling out residents by name, while everyone else stared down at the floor. People learned quickly that arguing with her only made things worse. So most of us adapted the same strategy: stay quiet and stay out of her way. Because Karen didn't just enjoy authority, she fed on it. The attention, the control, the feeling that everyone else had to answer to her. And if someone dared challenge that illusion of power, she had 1,000 little ways to make their life miserable. For years, that's exactly how the neighborhood survived her. We ignored the noise, tolerated the lectures, and waited for her storms to pass. None of us realized that her arrogance wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. For all her obsession with rules, Karen had exactly one exception, and that exception was her son Greg. If the HOA handbook had 1,000 regulations, none of them applied to him. Greg was 13, lanky, always half smiling like he knew the world bent a little differently around him. And in Karen's eyes, he could do no wrong. If a neighbor complained about him cutting across their yard on his bike, Karen called it harmless fun. If someone mentioned he was a little reckless, she brushed it off as jealousy. The first time I noticed something strange, Greg was sitting behind the wheel of Karen's car in the driveway, hands gripping it like he was imagining the road ahead. Karen stood nearby laughing, telling him to pretend he was driving. It seemed harmless enough. Kids dream about driving all the time. But a week later, I saw the car slowly roll down their driveway with Greg actually steering it. Karen sat in the passenger seat, calm as if this was completely normal. After that, the sightings became more frequent. Greg easing the car down the street. Greg circling the block. Greg alone. No supervision, no hesitation. Just a teenager piloting a machine that weighed several thousand pounds through a neighborhood full of families. Neighbors noticed. You could see it in the way conversations stopped when the engine passed by. But nobody wanted the headache of confronting Karen. Still, every time that car rumbled past my house, a tight feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was the quiet certainty that sooner or later, something was going to go very wrong. Eventually, that tight feeling in my chest turned into something I couldn't ignore anymore. One afternoon, I saw Karen standing at the curb with her clipboard, inspecting a neighbor's lawn like she was preparing a citation. Greg's car was parked nearby, still warm from a lap around the block. That was the moment I decided silence wasn't helping anyone. I walked over and kept my voice calm, explaining that letting a 13-year-old drive through a neighborhood full of kids was dangerous. I told her it wasn't about rules or HOA drama. It was about safety. Karen didn't hear concern. She heard a challenge. Her face tightened instantly, and before I knew it, she was raising her voice loud enough for half the street to hear. She laughed like the idea was ridiculous, claiming Greg handled the car better than most adults she knew. Then she leaned a little closer and accused me of being jealous, as if warning her about a potential accident was somehow a personal attack. A few neighbors slowed their walks, pretending not to listen while clearly hearing every word. The conversation went nowhere. Karen kept talking, louder each minute, until the entire thing turned into a small public spectacle. Finally, I shook my head and walked away, telling myself I had done my part. But as I stepped back onto my porch, a quiet thought followed me inside. Some people only learn when the consequences finally arrive. A few days later, the afternoon felt ordinary, the kind of calm moment you never realize is fragile until it disappears. The sun was warm, the street was quiet, and my daughter Emily was sitting on the edge of our porch drawing bright circles on the sidewalk with a box of chalk. She hummed to herself while she worked, completely absorbed in turning the concrete into her own little masterpiece. I remember watching her for a moment before stepping inside to grab a glass of water. That was when the quiet shattered. First came the sound of an engine, loud and strained, like someone pressing the gas far too hard. Then tires screeched against the pavement. It was the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your brain even understands why. I rushed toward the front door just as a violent crash exploded through the air. Wood splintered, glass shattered. The entire porch shook under the impact. Karen's car had slammed straight through the railing like it was made of paper. For a second, everything was frozen in a cloud of dust and broken boards. Then I saw Emily lying on the ground beside the twisted porch steps, her chalk scattered around her like tiny pieces of color against the gray concrete. My legs moved before my thoughts could catch up. I dropped beside her, calling her name, trying to keep my voice steady even as panic flooded through me. Neighbors began rushing outside, their voices overlapping in confusion while someone shouted to call an ambulance. As the car's engine sputtered and finally died, I forced myself to look toward the driver's seat. It wasn't Karen behind the wheel. It was Greg, pale and shaking, gripping the steering wheel with both hands like he couldn't understand what had just happened. But none of that mattered anymore. All I could think about was my daughter as sirens finally began screaming down the street toward us. Hospitals have a strange way of stretching time. Minutes feel like hours when someone you love is lying behind a door you're not allowed to enter. I sat beside Emily's bed, listening to the steady beeping of monitors while doctors moved in and out of the room with quiet, careful urgency. They talked about scans, bruising, and a possible surgery to repair the damage to her leg. I nodded through every explanation, but my mind kept replaying the crash over and over again. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood knew what had happened. Neighbors started reaching out, some bringing food, others just standing beside me in the hallway offering quiet support. Several of them mentioned something important. They had seen Greg driving before. Some even had security cameras pointing toward the street. Footage was already being shared with the police. Then something happened that I still struggle to believe. A man in a suit approached me near the waiting area and handed me a stack of papers. Karen was suing me. According to her claim, the design of my porch had caused the accident and damaged her vehicle, and she wanted compensation. For a moment, I actually thought it had to be a mistake. My daughter was still lying in a hospital bed, and Karen had decided the best response was to blame us. But the more evidence surfaced, the clearer the truth became. Neighbors stepped forward with statements. Cameras revealed Greg driving alone multiple times, and the police investigation quickly started moving in a very different direction. That was the moment I realized something important. If Karen wanted a legal fight, she was finally going to get one. Courtrooms are quiet in a way that feels heavy. Like every word carries more weight than it normally would. When our case finally reached that room, Karen walked in with the same confident posture she used during HOA meetings, chin slightly raised as if she still believed she controlled the situation. But courtrooms don't work the way neighborhood politics do. Evidence speaks louder than authority. One by one, the facts came forward. Security footage showed Greg driving Karen's car around the neighborhood days before the crash. Witnesses confirmed they had seen it happen repeatedly. Police reports made it clear that Karen knew exactly what her son had been doing and chose to allow it anyway. Each piece stacked on top of the last until the picture became impossible to ignore. When the judge finally spoke, Karen's lawsuit collapsed almost instantly. The court dismissed her claim and ruled that she was responsible for the accident caused by letting an underage driver operate her vehicle. The consequences hit quickly after that. Legal fees, medical expenses, and repairs for my home added up to a number Karen clearly never expected to face. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than any HOA notice she had ever posted. The same neighbors who once avoided confrontation finally stood up, and Karen's grip on the HOA vanished almost overnight. Emily recovered slowly, stronger with each passing week, and watching Karen's reputation crumble taught me something simple about power. When it's built on arrogance instead of responsibility, it eventually collapses under its own weight. But I'm curious what you think. Did Karen finally face the consequences she deserved?